Welcome to Murder Mindset, the podcast where darkness lurks behind every mind and mystery shrouds every motive. I'm your host, Kelsey Coffey. Each week, we peel back the layers of the most chilling cases, exposing the twisted psychology that drives ordinary people to commit extraordinary acts of evil. From cold calculations to impulsive rage, we delve into the minds of killers, what they thought, what they felt, and what made them snap. So prepare to face the unsettling truths lurking beneath the surface, because in this world, nothing is simply black and white. I want to take you to the early hours of August 13th, 2018, to the suburbs of Frederick, Colorado, a place that looked like any other American neighborhood, with quiet streets and cookie-cutter homes where families were supposed to be safe. But in one of those homes, in the darkness, something unthinkable was about to unfold. A man woke his wife that morning with words that would seal her fate. He told her he wanted out. He told her about the affair. And in that moment of revelation, in that collision between truth and desperation, something inside of him broke. The marriage he'd already checked out of wasn't ending the way he planned. Police didn't know this yet. They knew a pregnant woman and 2 small children were missing. They knew a man was standing on his porch, appealing to the media for their safe return. They knew something felt deeply wrong about his composure, his flatness, his strange emotional distance. They didn't yet know that behind his carefully constructed performance lay one of the most heinous family annihilations in modern American history. They didn't know that somewhere in the oil fields outside of town, buried in the dirt, were the bodies of 3 people he claimed to love more than life itself. Then came the confession. Within 2 days, Chris Watts was sitting in an interrogation room telling investigators exactly what he had done. By August 16th, as the bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were being pulled from the oil storage tanks, the story began to emerge. A story of infidelity, coercive control, financial desperation, and the single-minded determination of a man to erase his entire family as if his wife and daughters never existed. This is the case of Chris Watts and the Watts family. It's a story that has spawned documentaries, podcasts, true crime obsessions, and endless speculation. But beneath all the media noise lies a fundamental question that haunts us. How does an ordinary man, a husband, a father, seemingly average worker at an oil and gas company, become capable of murdering his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters? What drives that transformation from complacency to catastrophe? And what did we miss? What warning signs were there? And who failed to see them? I'm Kelsey Coffey, and this is Murder Mindset. We're not just recounting the events of August 13th, 2018. We're diving into the psychology of a man who calculated his escape so carefully that he murdered 4 people to achieve it. We're examining the escalation, the deception, and the moments when intervention might have changed everything. This case isn't just about a killer. It's about a family, a community, and the insidious way that isolation, infidelity, and financial stress can corrode a relationship until violence becomes inevitable. Shanann was born January 10th, 1984 in New Jersey, but she grew up in Southern Pines, North Carolina, in Moore County, a place with small-town roots and family values that would shape who she became. She was the daughter of Frank and Sandra, and had a brother, Frankie, who she was close to in a way that mattered. Shanann went to Pinecrest High School, and by all accounts, she was a young woman with ambition, with dreams, with a fierce loyalty to the people she loved. She had the kind of personality that made people want to be around her. Warm, outgoing, determined to squeeze every bit of joy out of life. After high school, she went to work as a human resources specialist at Children's Hospital Colorado Medical Campus in Aurora, starting in 2013. It was steady work, meaningful work, the kind of job that mattered because it was helping children in crisis. But Shanann wanted more. She wanted to be her own boss. She wanted to build something to transcend the 9-to-5 grind. In 2016, Shanann became an independent representative for a company that marketed a line of products called thrive. On the surface, it looked like a path to financial independence. She posted constantly on Facebook and Instagram, documented her life with her family. She championed the products with infectious energy. Her social media presence became a carefully curated snapshot of a bustling, prosperous, happy family. Beach vacations, affectionate moments with her husband, pride in her daughters. The excitement about the new baby on the way was there, laid out for her hundreds of followers to see and celebrate. Shanahan's 2 daughters were the light of her life. Bella Marie was born December 17th, 2013, a beautiful 4-year-old with her mother's spark, her ability to draw love from everyone around her. Celeste Catherine, whom everyone called Cece, came into the world July 17th, 2015, bright, curious 3-year-old who filled the house with the kind of joy that only small children can. In the photos Shanahan posted, Bella and Cece were always laughing, always moving, always at the center of the family's moments. Shanahan spoke about them with the kind of profound love that defines good mothers. She talked about their personalities, their funny sayings, their growth, their potential. She documented first days of school, dance moves, quiet moments curled up watching cartoons with Daddy. These weren't just her children. They were her purpose, her identity, her reason for waking up in the morning. Shanahan's proudest moment, the news that filled her with a different kind of joy, came when she discovered she was pregnant again. She was 15 weeks along when she learned it was a boy. She and her husband had already named him Nico Lee Watts. Her due date was January 31st, 2019. She could already imagine her family complete, her dream of having 3 kids realized. Her husband had seemed thrilled when she showed him the ultrasound picture. Little Peanut, he had written on social media. Love him or her already. Those words, captured in screenshots, would later seem like the performance of a man already planning a different future. One where none of these people existed. Shanahan worked as an independent representative, but the job came with its own pressures and costs. She spent around $500 a week on products she was supposed to be selling. She had set up her downline, people she'd recruited whom bought from her. The money was unpredictable, and the demands on her time were constant. Post, engage, recruit, promote, keep building the dream. They'd bought their home, their beautiful house in Frederick, for around $400,000, and they were working hard to stay afloat. But on the surface, on social media, they seemed like they were thriving. They looked like they had it all figured out. The Watts family lived in Frederick, Colorado, a small suburb about 30 miles north of Denver, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, where kids played in yards, where the community felt safe because nothing bad ever happened there. It was the kind of town where people assumed their kids could walk to school without fear, where front doors didn't need to be locked, where the worst thing that typically happened was a property dispute or a parking lot argument. Shanahan's parents, Frank and Sandra, still lived in North Carolina, and Shanahan was close to them in the way that mattered deeply. In the summer of 2018, just weeks before her death, Shanahan and the girls spent 6 weeks in North Carolina with her family. They left Frederick in late June and didn't return until August 7th. She'd missed her family. She loved being with them. She fed her girls ice cream and took them to the beach and let them stay up late laughing with their grandparents. These were the moments that made her feel rooted, connected, loved in the most fundamental way. Someone she'd made promises to, someone she'd built a life with, was moving toward violence. He was planning. He was deceiving. He was building the architecture of their destruction. Shanahan and Chris had been married for nearly 6 years. They'd met, fallen in love, built a life together. They'd bought a house, started a family, made plans for the future. But beneath the surface, the relationship had begun to deteriorate in ways that were becoming harder to hide. Chris had, by most accounts, checked out of the marriage. He told his best friend Mark in June that he was considering leaving. He told his parents he was getting a divorce. He told the realtor that he and Shanann were separating. He was already rehearsing the narrative of his departure, telling different versions of their separation story to different people, setting the stage, establishing alibis for his emotional distance, preparing people for a split that never came in the way anyone expected. In June 2018, Chris met Nicole Kessinger, a coworker at the petroleum company. She was 30 years old, single, available. They struck up a conversation over a broken gas meter, then kept running into each other around the office. The fourth time they met, Chris mentioned he had moved to Colorado from North Carolina. When Kessinger asked what he meant by we, he showed pictures of Bella and Celeste on his phone, but he also showed his lock screen. He told Kessinger he was going through a mutual divorce, that the separation was almost finalized, that he was a single father for all intents and purposes. None of this was true, but Chris had become very good at lying. By early July 2018, Chris and Kessinger began a physical relationship. They saw each other up to 5 times a week. He told her that he and his wife had agreed to separate, that they were working out the financial details. He never introduced Kessinger to his family. He never took her to his home. He kept her completely compartmentalized, a secret life that existed only at work and in clandestine meetings. People began to notice the shift in Chris. He became more withdrawn, more distant from Shanann. She noticed it too. When she returned from North Carolina on August 7th, she came home expecting to reconnect with her husband, to settle back into family life. Instead, she found a man who was increasingly absent and Nicole, a woman who'd spent summer months with her own family, pouring her love into her daughters, was now coming home to a husband who'd already mentally left the marriage and was building a new romantic life with someone else. What Shanann didn't fully understand was that Chris had already decided to do what he was going to do. Friends of Shanann's told her that there were marital problems. An acquaintance who knew them both mentioned that there was discord, that something felt off. But Shanann loved Chris. She loved the life they had built together. She was pregnant with their son. She had no idea that her husband was doing more than just fantasizing about leaving. He was planning the complete erasure of her and their children. The financial math was simple in his mind. If Shanann and the girls disappeared, he wouldn't have to pay child support. He wouldn't have to split the proceeds of the house sale. He wouldn't have to maintain a relationship with his children. He could keep the money, take the fresh start with Kessinger, and begin again, as if none of them ever mattered. The escalation toward violence was methodical. Chris wasn't in a rage. He wasn't responding to abuse or threats. He was calculating. He was strategizing. He was lying with extraordinary consistency and sophistication. He told his father he was leaving, told his girlfriend he was leaving, told his friends he was leaving. He was mentally preparing everyone around him for his departure. But the separation he had in mind was murder, not divorce. By August 13th, 2018, he had moved from fantasies and lies to intent. He had chosen the night. He had chosen the method. He had chosen the moment when Shanann would be most vulnerable, when the girls would be asleep, when he could act without witnesses. Early morning, August 13th, 2018, Chris woke Shanann while he was preparing for work. He had something to tell her, something he'd already rehearsed with others. He wanted to discuss their marriage. He wanted to talk about their future. But what started as a conversation became an argument. Shanann knew something was wrong. She sensed the distance, the coldness, the emotional chasm that had opened between them. When Chris finally said that he was having an affair, that he wanted a divorce, that he was leaving, Shanann responded with the kind of confrontation a wife has when she discovers infidelity. She was hurt. She was angry. She was desperate. According to Chris's later confession, she said something that broke through whatever internal restraint he was still holding on to. You're never going to see the kids again. In that moment, Chris claimed something inside him snapped. He put his hands around her neck and he strangled her. He killed his wife, a woman who was 15 months pregnant with their unborn son, in their bedroom. She fought and she struggled. Her arms thrashed against the pillows and the sheets, but Chris was determined. He held on until she stopped moving, until her body went still, until the woman who loved him was dead. But morning wasn't over. The girls were waking up. Bella and Celeste, 4 and 3, were beginning their day. They were about to encounter the aftermath of their mother's murder. At some point during the morning, as Chris was loading Shannon's lifeless body into the back of his work truck, one of the children came into the scene. Bella asked him a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "What are you doing with Mommy?" Chris told her that Mommy was sick. He said everything was okay. He told her lies designed to keep her calm while he transported her dying or dead mother to his vehicle. He put Bella and Celeste in the back seat of his truck without their car seats. He had Shannon's body in the back and drove to an oil and gas field where he worked. This was his workplace. These were oil tanks he knew intimately. This is where he decided to dispose of his family. When they arrived, he took Celeste first. He took his 3-year-old daughter, wrapped her in a blue Yankees blanket, and smothered her, her small body lifeless and limp. He then carried to one of the oil tanks and dropped her inside. Bella was still in the truck. When he returned, she asked him, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" Chris, responding to his daughter's premonition, smothered her with the same blanket, but Bella fought. She resisted. She thrashed against him. This 4-year-old girl intuited that her father was about to kill her. Her last words were, "Daddy, no." Chris has said he hears those 2 words every time he closes his eyes. Bella was dropped into a separate oil tank from her sister, so that even in death, they could not be together. After disposing of his daughters, Chris buried Shannon in a shallow grave near the oil tanks. The grave was only about 3 inches deep. Her body was positioned face down in a kneeling position, her arms outstretched in front of her, her feet pulled up underneath and behind her. He took her wedding ring off and left it on the counter at home, trying to suggest she wanted a divorce, that she wanted to leave him, crafting the narrative, planting false evidence, beginning the deception that would unfold over the next 48 hours. At 1:40 p.m. that same day, August 13th, Nicole Atkinson, a close friend of Shannon's, called Chris asking if he had seen his wife. Shannon had missed a doctor's appointment that morning. Chris said no, he hadn't seen her. Nicole was worried, so she drove to the Watts home and noticed something disturbing. Shannon's car was in the garage. Her purse was inside. The children's medication was inside. Shannon had left her phone. All the things a mother never leaves behind were still there. Nicole called 911. She told police that her friend was missing along with her 2 daughters. The missing persons investigation began quickly. Chris appeared on Denver 7 that evening, making an appeal for his family's safe return. He spoke about how much he missed them, talked about how the house was incomplete without them. He said all the things a grieving husband and father is supposed to say. But something was wrong. He was too calm. His affect was too flat. His eyes didn't hold the kind of desperation you'd expect to see from a man whose pregnant wife and 2 young children had vanished. Detectives watching that interview, particularly FBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation agents, knew. Something in them shifted. They knew they were looking at a guilty man. On August 15th, Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He went to the Frederick Police Department and submitted to the examination. He failed spectacularly, one of the lowest scores possible on a polygraph. The evidence was now overwhelming. Investigators had been examining his phone records. They found the affair. They discovered Nicole Kessinger. They knew he had been lying about the separation, lying about the divorce, lying about his entire relationship with his family. After the polygraph failure, after the weight of the evidence began to crush him down, asked to speak to his father. Ronnie Watts was brought to the interrogation room, and Chris made a confession, though not the one investigators had been hoping for. He admitted to strangling Shannon, but he maintained the lie about the girls. He claimed Shannon had smothered them out of rage, and that he had killed Shannon. It was a last-ditch attempt to minimize his culpability, to spread the blame, to suggest that his wife had done the unthinkable and that he had simply reacted in a fit of rage. But nobody believed him. At 11:40 p.m. on August 15th, Chris Watts was arrested on suspicion of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. CBI agent Tammy Lee had watched Chris's television appeal and immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. Investigators knew they were dealing with a family annihilation case and moved with the urgency and sophistication that such a case demanded. The search for the bodies began at the petroleum facility where Chris worked. Investigators deployed aerial drones to conduct surveillance of the oil field. From the air, they could see things that weren't visible from the ground. Drones picked up evidence of recent disturbance. Fresh dirt movement consistent with a clandestine grave. They also found a bedsheet in the field that later matched the pattern of pillowcases and top sheet recovered from the Watts kitchen trash can. Drones guided investigators to specific locations, and when they arrived on the ground with Chris's confession providing crucial details, they began the grim work of recovery. On August 16, 2018, the bodies were located. Shanann was found buried in a shallow grave near 2 oil storage tanks, positioned exactly how Chris had described. But when investigators looked into the oil tanks where Chris said he placed Bella and Celeste, they couldn't see anything at first. The tanks contained crude oil. The fumes inside were so thick and noxious that visibility was nearly zero. Investigators peered inside with flashlights and saw nothing but darkness and toxic vapor. Chris had been so specific. He knew where he'd left his daughters. The decision was made to drain the oil tanks. Authorities arranged for the tanks to be emptied, a process that would take time. Bella and Celeste remained submerged in crude oil for a 4th day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and most of Thursday, before their bodies could be recovered. When they were finally pulled from the tanks, the forensic evidence was stark. There were scratch marks on one of the girls' bodies. There were tufts of hair on the opening of one of the oil tanks. The evidence told a story of a killer who had been careless, indifferent to the dignity of his victims, even in death. He had shoved his daughter's body in those tanks with such force that they left physical marks, traces of their struggle. Digital forensics provided crucial corroboration. Investigators examined Chris's phone records and discovered the affair. They pulled his search history and found evidence of his planning. They established a timeline of his lies. They compared his statements to police with the physical evidence found. They compared his statements to police with the physical evidence found at the crime scene, and the contradictions were glaring. Chris had claimed that Shanann killed the girls, and he killed Shanann. But the evidence told a different story. There was no evidence of Shanann having killed anyone. There was overwhelming evidence that Chris had systematically murdered his entire family. The physical evidence from the crime scene, the digital evidence from his phone, the testimony from witnesses who'd seen his behavior and heard his lies, all of it pointed to one conclusion. Chris Watts had made a conscious, deliberate decision to end the lives of his wife and 2 daughters and their unborn son, because he wanted to start over with a woman he'd only known for 2 months. On February 18th, 2019, Chris agreed to a 5-hour prison interview with investigators from the CBI, the FBI, and the Frederick Police Department. He was incarcerated at the time, but authorities wanted to hear directly from him. They wanted to understand his motivations in his own words. During this interview, Chris finally abandoned the lie about Shanann killing the girls. He admitted to smothering both Bella and Celeste. He provided details about their final moments that were almost unbearably difficult to hear. He talked about Bella fighting back, about her asking what he was going to do to her, about his daughter's last words. Prosecutor Michael Rourke would later say that while Chris's confession was mostly truthful, he didn't believe the man was truly capable of remorse. I honestly don't believe that this monster has the ability to have remorse at all, Rourke said. The breakthrough, the moment when the full horror of the case became undeniable, was not a single moment. but a cascade of confessions and evidence that had built toward an inescapable truth. A man had murdered his entire family to achieve a fresh start, and he had done so with calculated precision. But building the case is one thing, winning it in court is another. Christopher Lee Watts was charged in the Weld County District Court with 5 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Shanann, Bella, Celeste. 2 counts related to the fact that both children were under the age of 12, which elevated the charge. 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy for the death of unborn Nico Lee, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. It was prosecuted by the Weld County District Attorney's Office. Originally, the case carried the possibility of the death penalty or life without parole. The prosecution's theory was straightforward. Chris Watts murdered his family out of the desire for a fresh start. He wanted to begin a new relationship with Nicole Kessinger. He wanted to escape the financial obligations of child support. He wanted to avoid dividing the proceeds of the house sale. He wanted to erase the life he built with Shanann because that life had become an obstacle to the life he wanted to live. The premeditation was evident in his careful planning, in his lies to multiple people about the state of his marriage, in his methodical disposal of bodies at the location he knew intimately, in his removal of Shanann's wedding ring to suggest she wanted a divorce. Every action pointed to a man who had thought through what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. The prosecution had no need for a complicated narrative. The facts spoke for themselves, but here's where the case took an unusual turn. Normally, in a case this serious, with this much evidence, the defense would mount a vigorous challenge. They would contest the narrative. They would suggest alternative theories. They would demand a trial. Instead, on November 6, 2018, Christopher Watts pled guilty to all 9 counts. There was no trial. There was no prolonged legal battle. The defense strategy was to accept responsibility and appeal for mercy. Before that guilty plea could be entered, there was a crucial negotiation. The district attorney's office had the authority to pursue the death penalty, but Shanann's family, her parents Frank and Sandra, and her brother Frankie, made an extraordinary request. They asked for the death penalty not to be sought. They explained their reasoning to DA Michael Rourke. The death penalty in Colorado involves decades of appeals, extraordinary delays, and uncertainty. Governor John commuted the execution of another death row inmate, Nathan Dunlap, who had been convicted in 1996 and remained alive on death row for over 2 decades. Shann's family did not want to subject themselves to another 20, 30 years of legal proceedings. They didn't want to keep reopening this wound. They asked for finality. They asked for closure. They asked that no more lives, not even the life of the man who killed their family, be taken. You do what the victims' families want you to do in this case, Rourke said. And so the death penalty was eliminated from consideration in exchange for Chris's guilty plea to all 9 counts. On November 19th, 2018, the judge sentenced Christopher Lee Watts. The courtroom filled with members of Shanann's family. Her parents, Frank and Sandra, were there. Her brother Frankie was there. They gave victim impact statements that morning. Shanann's father, Frank, looked directly at Chris and said, life will never be the same without Shanann. He called him an evil monster. Frankie, reading from a statement, asked how he could have done this. What kind of person slaughters the people who love him most? Frankie asked, did you really think you'd get away with this? Did you really think this was your best option? To throw away your family like they were garbage? They deserve better, and you know it. I hope you spend the rest of your life staring at the ceiling every night, being haunted by what you've done. The courtroom was silent. The judge then issued his sentence. He called the murders the most inhumane and vicious crime he's ever handled in the thousands of cases he'd seen, and nothing less than the maximum sentence would be appropriate. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 3 to be served consecutively. and 2 to be served. He received an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shannan's pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with the bodies of his daughters. He will die in prison. The verdict was guilty on all counts, and the sentence was final. Christopher Watts was transferred to prison. He now serves his sentence at Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security facility where he will spend the rest of his life. For Shannan's family, the aftermath has been a process of grief, advocacy, and the painful work of rebuilding lives shattered by loss. Frank and Sandra filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit against Chris on the same day he was sentenced. They sought compensation for the extreme emotional stress and damage they had suffered. They demanded that Chris be prohibited from profiting from his crimes in any way. The lawsuit sent a message. He would not benefit financially from the murder of their daughter and grandchildren. He would not write a book and earn royalties. He would not participate in documentaries that might pay him. Shannan's family worked to ensure that Shannan's legacy is one of love and remembrance, not of the monster who took her from them. The community of Frederick, Colorado was profoundly affected by the murders. This was a place where people assumed their families were safe, where they believed nothing like this could ever happen. Suddenly, the town's sense of security was shattered. Neighbors who had lived peacefully on tree-lined streets now looked at their homes differently. The police chief of Frederick released a statement thanking the community for their overwhelming support. But the truth was that the community was reeling. Investigators from 3 agencies had descended on their town. A home that had been filled with laughter and life was now a crime scene. The girls' swing set was empty. The house that had been sold in foreclosure sat vacant, deteriorating. A monument to tragedy. In later years, after Netflix released a documentary called American Murder, The Family Next Door, hundreds of cars began driving through the neighborhood. People came from out of state to see the house where the murders had happened. Neighbors put up no trespassing signs. They pleaded with people to be respectful. The tragedy had become true crime tourism, and Frederick was struggling to reclaim its sense of safety and normalcy. The case has sparked crucial conversations about warning signs of familicide and the escalating patterns that can lead to family annihilation. Experts point to several risk factors that were evident in Chris's behavior: the extramarital affair, the financial stress, the expressed desire to leave the marriage, the methodical lying to multiple people about the state of the relationship, the way he began compartmentalizing his life. These are not subtle warning signs. These are red flags that, in retrospect, suggest a man had already mentally left his family and was planning their elimination. The case also highlights the danger of the separation period, the moment when a spouse expresses their intention to leave. Research has shown that intimate partner violence escalates during separation and the immediate aftermath. Women are at a heightened risk of homicide from their partners during this period. Shannan Watts was killed on the morning her husband told her he wanted a divorce. There may not have been visible domestic violence in the Watts household before that day, but there was definitely the emergence of coercive control. The affair itself was a form of control. The lying was a form of control. The secret compartmentalization was a form of control. If you suspect danger, if your instincts are screaming at you that something is wrong, trust those instincts. Tell a friend, tell a family member, call the police, call a domestic violence hotline. Your willingness to intervene, to believe the threat, to take action, could literally save lives. The Watts case reveals something deeply unsettling about the nature of hidden violence in America. We tell ourselves that monsters are obvious, that we'd recognize them if we saw them. We tell ourselves that evil announces itself, that dangerous people are strange or obviously unstable. But Chris Watts was a man who went to work every day. He had coworkers, he had a home, he had a wife who posted loving messages about him on social media. He was not visibly unstable. He was not raging or violent in any way that would draw immediate attention. What he was calculating. What he was willing to lie with extraordinary consistency to multiple people about the fundamental facts of his life. What he was capable of compartmentalizing his reality so thoroughly that he could tell his girlfriend he was single and about to be divorced while going home to his pregnant wife. This is what makes family annihilation cases so haunting. They don't fit the narrative of crime that we're comfortable with. We're used to crimes of passion, crimes of rage, crimes committed in moments of lost control. But the Watts murders were not crimes of passion. They were crimes of cowardice, masquerading as calculation. They were the act of a man so determined to escape his obligations, so invested in his own comfort and freedom, that he decided the solution was to destroy everything. Not to face the discomfort of a custody battle, not to accept the financial responsibility of supporting his children, not to endure the social embarrassment of divorce, but to erase completely and permanently every person who might make a claim on his future. Family was supposed to be safe. In every case this season, that trust was shattered by someone bound by blood. Today, we honor those victims, not as case numbers, but as the lives lost to someone they should have been able to trust. If you recognize patterns of control, isolation, or manipulation in your own family, reach out. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Talk to someone. They're there to help. This is Murder Mindset. And until next time, remember, the strongest families are the ones willing to see the danger within.